Many people in this country are not properly fed. Scientists for years have been studying the ways in which food affects health and growth, and the results of a great deal of their work were made known early in 1936. Their conclusions were widely reported in the newspapers, and they shocked the public conscience. The scientists said that the health of the nation was being gravely affected by insufficient food and wrong feeding. Some of them went so far as to say that half the people of Great Britain are undernourished. It may seem surprising that large numbers of people can be underfed or wrongly fed without themselves or anyone else realizing it, yet such is the case. The recent discoveries of science in the field of nutrition have indeed opened up a new era in medicine. So let us meet a few of the leading workers in the field and hear some of their main conclusions. In 1912, Sir Gowland Hopkins, late President of the Royal Society, whom you see here in his Cambridge laboratory, drew the attention of the scientific world to the existence of vitamins, those organic constituents of common foods which are needed for proper growth and to give protection against disease. In 1923, Sir John Orr, who is director of the Rowett Institute and of the Imperial Bureau of Animal Nutrition, proved the value of the traces of minerals present in foods. Here you see him among some experimental animals on the Institute's farm. He carried out experiments on animals which showed that a minimum of calcium, iron and phosphorus was absolutely necessary for their proper growth and full health. In 1932, Sir Robert McCarrison's work in India showed that the great variation in physique between different Indian races was a direct result of the difference between their diets. Those southern races which live principally on rice are poor in physique, as compared with the northern races which eat milk, fruit, vegetables and meat. At the present time, at the Rowett Institute in Aberdeen, a group of rats are being brought up on a typical poor working class diet and compared with another group of rats fed upon a good diet. Here's a typical rat from each group. The smaller rat received the working class diet. You can see how much healthier and more lively the bigger one is. Children are the first victims of bad or insufficient food. Practical experiments have been carried out upon school children to find out what happens when foods are given over and above the ordinary diets which were reckoned in the past to be satisfactory. At Christ's Hospital, the famous Blue Coat School, Dr. Friend, the school doctor, has watched for many years the effects of changing diet upon the boys at the school. Here you see the boys of the school being weighed and measured. Perhaps the most important point established was that the addition of a pint of milk to a quite generous diet made boys grow taller and heavier, reduced their proneness to various diseases, and gave them more physical and mental vitality. There is a marked difference in the heights of boys drawn from different classes of society. At 13 years of age, the boys at Christ's Hospital School are on an average nearly 2.5 inches taller than those from council schools. At 17, they're nearly 4 inches taller than working boys of the same age. These differences are largely due to differences between the food they eat. Let us go a little further into this question of how food consumption varies between class and class. Sir John Orr, whom you saw earlier in this film, recently set about discovering what foods people eat in this country and how much of them. Before we consider some of his findings, let us first roughly classify the important constituents of food. Everybody knows about the energy foods, which make the body work and keep us warm. The carbohydrates, such as starch and sugar, fall into this group, and also the fats. White bread, cereals, potatoes, sugar, margarine, suet are entirely or largely composed of such energy foodstuffs. Their job is to act as fuel for the body, not to build it up or to protect it against disease. Then we have the proteins. They are the body-building foodstuffs, which are so important for growing children and for keeping the body of the adult in repair. The most important foods in this class are milk, eggs, cheese, fish, and meat. Finally, there are the protective foodstuffs, whose value has only recently been discovered. These are the minerals, principally calcium, phosphorus, iron, and iodine, and the various vitamins. The foods particularly rich in them are milk and milk products, eggs, vegetables, fruit, salads, fat fish like herring, and fish oils like cod liver oil. As you have already heard, the vitamins and minerals protect against disease, build up and keep in repair the body tissues and bones, and maintain the quality of the blood. The next thing we want to know is whether people in this country do get enough of these essential foods or not. To begin with, how much money is spent a head on all foods each week by the people in this country? Here are the figures. 4.5 million spend on the average 4 shillings a head. Then there are 9 million spending about 6 shillings a head. Another 9 million spend 8 shillings, still another 9 million 10 shillings, and again another 9 million about 12 shillings. And lastly come 4.5 million with an average weekly food bill of 14 shillings a head. That makes 6 groups in all. Now let's see how the consumption of two important foods, bread and milk, changes as we pass from the lowest spending group to the highest. In the 4 shilling group, the average consumption of milk is about a pint a head a week. The consumption of bread, which here includes flour used for other purposes, is about 68 ounces. When we pass on to group 2, 6 shillings a head, the milk consumption has risen to about 2 pints a head. But the change in consumption of bread is negligible. And as we pass up through the groups, the consumption of milk increases rapidly, but the amount of bread and flour eaten hardly changes. Why is this? Bread prevents you feeling hungry and gives you energy to get through a day's work. But the value of milk is not immediately apparent, so the housewife in the lower groups must buy bread first. This leaves her with very little money to buy milk. And even in the 14 shillings group, the consumption of fresh milk is only about 5.5 pints a week per head, whereas the experts are all agreed that it should be at least 7. Now let's see what deficiencies there are in the consumption of those valuable food constituents, the minerals, calcium and iron, for example. These 6 men represent our 6 income groups. Here we have marked a level of adequacy. That is, the consumption of calcium necessary for perfect health. The people in the highest group get enough. Consumption falls away rapidly until only a tiny percentage of the standard requirement is satisfied in the 4 shillings group. And remember that calcium builds bone and tissue and is needed to keep the body in repair. Now for iron, which controls blood quality and prevents anemia. In the lower groups, it begins to fall rapidly and shows serious deficiencies. What are the effects of these deficiencies? Sir John Orr tells us that of 1,000 women in Aberdeen, drawn from the 3 lowest income groups, that's to say from the poorer half of the community, half of them, 500, showed some anemic symptoms, while 150 were severely anemic. Sir John Orr's conclusion is that a diet really adequate for health is eaten by barely half the community, while that of the poorest class, numbering at least 4.5 million people, is deficient in every constituent. These countrywide conclusions are supported by many local surveys. Investigators have gone into the homes of all classes of the people and obtained from them exact information on the food they are able to buy and the money they spend on it. Among the many workers who have made this kind of study are Dr. McGonigal, Medical Officer of Health in Stockton-on-Tees, and Dr. Borland, Medical Officer of Health in the London Borough of Bethnal Green.
I started to find out the consumption of milk and butter in Bethnal Green. I found that the average consumption of milk per person was less than half the average for the whole country, and the consumption of butter was less than 1/3 the national average.
And you must remember that the national consumption of milk and butter is too low. Now, I've been finding out in my own district how much the average housewife has to spend and what she spends it on, right down to the last penny.
I usually have 21 shillings left for 8 of us for food.
I see. About 2 and 8 pence a week for each person.
Yes.
How often do you have meat?
Well, pretty well every day. Things are pretty bad on Thursday and Friday that I'm not able more or less to get it on Fridays. Sometimes on Thursdays.
And now, Mrs. Seabright, I see you're 5 in family, and you've got 4 shillings a week to spend for each of you on food. Do you find you can feed your family well enough on that?
Well, not very well. It's rather difficult at times. Of course, in the winter it was more difficult with coal, etc. being expensive, and I've seen my husband and myself going rather short sometimes to give the children a dinner. Towards the end of the week, of course. We've had bread and jam or bread and margarine and a cup of tea.
Are you able to buy as much fruit and as many vegetables as you'd like?
No, not as many as I should like, of course. Just now the vegetables are cheaper than they were a few months back, beans and cabbage. My
Yes.
children are very fond of them, but As I said, a few months back cabbages were 4p and 6p a pound, and we never saw cabbage for weeks. And fruit. Of course they get a little sometimes when I have a few coppers to spare, but towards the end of the week, as I say, it's a case of scratching along.
The scientists in their laboratories and the social workers in their investigations have shown us what is wrong with the national diet. I am the secretary of the Zoological Society, and at the zoo we have found the absolute necessity of giving the animals proper food. If we gave the gorillas and chimpanzees a diet like that actually eaten by millions of human beings in this country, we should be rightly blamed for not keeping them in proper condition. Let us see what is actually being done about this national problem. Nutrition is bound to play an important part in the national policy of this country. Many government departments are directly concerned with it. In fact, we really need a national food policy. An example of government policy is to be found in the activities of the Milk Marketing Board. By means of subsidies and the control of milk production, the consumption of milk was last year increased by 78.5 million gallons. 2 3/4 million school children receive daily rations of milk at a specially reduced price of a halfpenny for 1/3 of a pint. Here is Mr. Walter Elliott at an elementary school on the first day of the cheap milk in schools scheme. State grants make possible much of the work of maternity and child welfare centres. Here, in the Shoreditch Borough Council Centre in London, which was built with the help of the Carnegie Trust, free midday meals are provided for nursing and expectant mothers with small incomes. A similar service is provided in Birmingham and a few other districts, but the practice is not yet general. Children up to the age of 5 present a special problem of nutrition. The first 5 years of life are the most important. It's during this period that the foundations of good health and physique should be laid. Here in Shoreditch, free meals are provided for these toddlers. They are given plenty of the protective and bodybuilding foods, cod liver oil, for example. A few children needing special care live at the centre. Others are brought in each day for a midday dinner. At the present time, such meals for toddlers are provided at only a few centres. The valuable results achieved will no doubt lead to an extension of the practice. At this maternity and child welfare centre, mothers are given regular instruction by a qualified dietitian in the importance and value of different foodstuffs and the best methods of preparing them. The great municipal bodies, Birmingham, Manchester, London and the rest, are also at work to check undernourishment. We cannot show them all, but the largest will serve as an example. Here is Mr. Herbert Morrison, leader of the London County Council, to tell you what London is doing.
London's County Council is fighting hard to overcome malnutrition amongst the children attending our elementary schools. Where lack of food is found to be the cause, free dinners and milk are immediately provided at school. In the London County Council's area, there are 900 elementary schools providing education for 490,000 school children. About 6,000 of these children, because of the poverty of their parents, cannot be fed properly at home. So we make sure they will have at least one good meal every school day by providing a free midday dinner for them. But for some children, the solution of this problem of ill nourishment is not so clear and straightforward. These children, therefore, are sent to one of the Council's special nutrition centres for a full investigation of their cases. At each centre, there is a care committee organiser. Her job is to discuss the mother's difficulties and help her carry out the doctor's orders. Children under treatment attend the clinics regularly. At each visit, they are examined to see whether progress is satisfactory. The doctor advises the mother on diet and any other home treatment. Each year in the schools, there is a routine medical inspection for about 200,000 children. It was found last year that 11,000 of them were below the normal standard of nutrition. Anemia is one of the commonest results of malnutrition. So at regular intervals, samples of the children's blood are taken and tested.
Now, after the nation and the municipalities, let us turn to a still wider field of effort, the League of Nations. The League, in November 1935, set up a committee to report upon the problem of nutrition. Viscount Astor was chairman of that committee, and here he is to tell you something about it.
2 points were emphasized in the course of the debate. Firstly, that the many people were underfed, and secondly, that there were surplus supplies of foodstuffs in some countries. The experts are agreed that there is malnutrition. In some cases, this amounts to hunger and even to starvation. But in all countries, even in a prosperous country like Britain, there is much ill health and suffering due to malnutrition. Ignorance about proper diets is widespread, and poverty is the main factor in malnutrition. Governments must face this and take proper steps to deal with. Especially must they provide proper and adequate food for children. As regards agriculture, if people eat enough of the right food, there will be no oversupply. In fact, farmers all over the world will have to increase their output. Most countries also will have to import considerable quantities of foods if the cost of living of the poor is to be kept low. This means that a wise nutrition policy will help to restore world trade and so be an important factor in the preservation of peace.
And now, what must we do in England? Here is what Dr. McGonigal has to say.
The average working-class housewife, by rule of thumb methods, knows pretty well what foodstuffs to buy to feed her family properly. Though she doesn't know the difference between a vitamin and a bus ticket, yet our investigations show quite clearly that as her income increases, she approaches more and more nearly to a really satisfactory diet. But there are hundreds of thousands of housewives who cannot afford to buy enough of the high-grade protective foods. All they can do is to feed their families with the lower-grade filling foods so that they won't feel hungry. Thus there is no starvation, but their physical development may be interfered with and their resistance to disease lowered by a shortage of just those particular items of the diet which are so expensive.
No complete solution of our problem is possible without considerable economic changes, either by providing the lowest paid members of the community with increased purchasing power, or with cheap or free milk and other protective foods. But such a solution is a difficult long-term matter, which will need all the community's patience and ingenuity. Meantime, for a large number of people, particularly in the higher income classes, much good can be done within the present limitations by teaching proper choice and use of foods. Let us briefly summarize the rules of good feeding. You'll remember earlier in this film how we classified the different types of food. To make up a good day's food for a working man, we must select some of each group to give a balanced diet. Fresh milk covers 2 groups, and he should have a pint of it. 2 ounces of butter, some green salad, some green vegetables, and an orange or a tomato. Then plenty of cheese or meat, and from the energy foods, bread, potatoes, sugar, and butter or margarine. Pastries, scones, and other appetizing foods are cheap sources of energy as well. But for the growing child, this is not a well-balanced diet. In proportion, he needs more of the bodybuilding and protective foods and less of the energy foods. Less bread and sugar. Too much sweet stuff may spoil his appetite and cut down the money left for his mother to buy green stuff, cheese, milk, fruit, and meat, which are more expensive, but will keep him healthy and help him to grow properly. Now you see how the food has been changed to give a properly balanced diet for a child. Babies need plenty of milk. They need daily cod liver oil and orange juice. So does the expectant and nursing mother. She should have green salads and vegetables and fresh fruit every day. Sea fish once or twice a week. Liver, lightly cooked, is a valuable food for her. These foods help to prevent anemia and rickets. The protective foods, milk, eggs, fruit, vegetables, are the most valuable for everyone, but especially for the children. Every child should have at least a pint of milk a day. Let us sum up. It is not the business of this film to attempt a complete solution to the problem of malnutrition, nor does it try to forecast the future. Its aim is to describe the existing situation, but not in terms of harrowing pictures of the worst sufferers from serious deficiency diseases. These it has deliberately avoided. The real problem of malnutrition is less obvious and spectacular in its effects, but much more widespread. The most striking thing is that we are more acutely aware of the problem today than ever before, though we know that we have barely begun with its practical solution. The conscience of the nation is aroused. The new scientific knowledge has shown us a new standard of life at which to aim. A new charter is being written for the people of the world, and by whatever means the problem is tackled, a better level of health and nutrition must and will be achieved.